Welcome to Process Unpacked, the podcast where we tackle project management and workflow challenges to help you work smarter. I'm Amir Khorram, a 20-year tech industry veteran, and in each episode, we're going to dive into real-world strategies to boost your team's efficiency. And we are brought to you by Meagle, a project management tool trusted by over 100,000 daily active users around the world. Today, I'm joined by Joe Michalowski, Head of Client Services, and Jacob Brain, Director of Operations and Marketers in Demand. They run a portfolio of marketing agencies all under one roof. Managing even a single agency with diverse teams in advanced project management requires seamless integration, smart automation, and adaptable processes. We're going to explore how they keep their teams aligned and efficient as they scale, a challenge familiar to any team handling complex projects and multiple stakeholders.
Welcome to Process Unpacked. Dive into practical insights, expert advice, and real stories from businesses of every size. Join us as we tackle project management challenges like team collaboration and workload management. Let's get started.
All right, guys, would love to learn a bit more about your company here and some of the things you guys are doing. Maybe you can describe your roles in Marketers in Demand and how project management has evolved as you've scaled and acquired new agencies.
So Marketers in Demand is a marketing agency, and we actually, underneath the Marketers in Demand umbrella, have several other agencies. So we have a kind of full service agency, a content focused agency, a video agency, and hopefully even more down the road as we continue to grow. My role specifically has changed over the years. I've actually been here for, I think, almost a decade. And so I've been in the strategist role, the PM role. I know it's a long time. Old man. Really anything across the board. But now I've settled into the operational role, and that's really my love. I love building systems, processes, making sure the machine, if you will, is running smoothly. The heart of that machine being project management, platforms and systems and processes. Really excited to chat with you guys.
And yeah, I'm Joe. I run client services here. So I always say this to clients. I am like front-facing client communications content person, and Jacob is my technical counterpart. He builds systems, and I am out here trying to use those systems and put them to work. And so we work very closely together to make sure that those are working the way we need them to. But yeah, love what I do. We're just talking to clients a lot and kind of learning what we need on the front end and trying to communicate that back to Jacob on the back end and saying, hey, like this piece of our project management system maybe needs tweak. How about we have a meeting? We should talk about what this client needs. And maybe this is a bigger example. Maybe it's a one-off, it's custom. But yeah, as things scale, I joined the start of this year and things have grown quite a bit. I feel like our systems have grown quite a bit, and I've gotten to watch Jacob really build from the ground up a lot of things. Yeah, it's been great. But happy to be here. Happy to chat.
That's great. Thank you, guys. And thanks again for your time and joining us here in this kickoff of our podcast series, of our content series here. So we're excited. So let me dig a little bit deeper here. What was the motivation behind creating like a unified project management approach for Marketers in Demand? Like, how did you tackle that challenge across the three distinct agencies?
Mm-hmm. I'll start like way back when we really first grew to the size where we needed like a really formal project management system. It was, again, probably 10 years or so ago. And at that time, we looked across the market and we didn't see a tool that really matched exactly what we wanted to do. The customization and project management tools wasn't nearly what it is like today. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up, because we were building websites at the same time too, we ended up building our own platform. And so that actually taught us a lot, and just an internal one for us to use. We called it Q. And that allowed us actually to really form a pretty robust understanding of what we wanted that system to look like. And so over the years, which I'm sure happens to everyone that does this, it became just wildly cumbersome to manage. And our team's time was just being taken up with changes we wanted to make, updates. We needed to rebuild it a couple times. And so at that point, we shifted to a really more formalized solution for this. And that is a big step towards like being able to build upon a system that's flexible enough, but also standardized enough. It connects to different platforms. I'm sure we'll dive into that. But really to go back to you answering your question on like, how have we like unified our PM systems, is for us, at least, the motivation behind that was like efficiency and simplicity. When you're pulling in an entire team and overnight you're growing however many team members jumping in, the more complicated it is, the bigger mess it's going to be. Whereas if you can have a really clean system with good documentation and kind of onboarding videos and stuff like that, that helps the whole process go way smoother. And so it's a kind of a balance between making sure it's all really simple, but also still runs really efficiency and has enough barriers to how that management should happen that people can slide in, if you will.
Can I add one thing to that? Because I can't believe Jacob's favorite thing to explain, and I might butcher it, but I'm going to try really hard. He has this metaphor. It's about a house. And so our operation. So we talked about how we have like multiple agencies. And Jacob, please tell me if I ruin this. There's marketers in demand, the house, but you could come in through the New North door or the Motion door, or we have another agency called Spoke, like that door. And depending on what you need as a business or in marketing, and they all do adjacent work, but it's not necessarily like when those agencies came together, they weren't all running with the same projects. They weren't all running with the same processes. And I don't really think our business could operate if it didn't have the unified project management system. We can't have everybody off doing different things, because once you are in the house, as Jacob says, like you have access to all of these different rooms. And like someone on our team, a strategist or somebody who works in development or in writing or in anything, like they all need to be in the same place in order for us as a business to continue growing. And so I can't have like the agency's processes in this corner and this agency doing a completely different thing over here, because they'd never come together. It just would never work. They'd essentially just stay siloed in their own corners. And we didn't want that as a business. So Jacob, did I do okay with your house metaphor?
You nailed it. I use metaphors all the time, and I only like maybe 10% of them stick. But when they stick, man, that's why I do the other 90%.
That's right. Yeah. Keep swinging, taking more shots at it. No, so that's a great segue, Joe. I appreciate that. What I wanted to ask maybe a little bit more insight around is actually, so with New North specializing in B2B marketing, business marketing, Motion business unit focusing on content, and then you mentioned Spoke, which is repurposing content. So how do you adapt project management like processes to fit each of the agencies' unique focus, right? While keeping them all aligned, because each one of those business units has their own priorities, but I'm sure in some ways they intersect along the way. So how do you keep all that aligned for your teams?
Yeah, the big thing there that's really helped us is creating a unified philosophy and process behind how we manage things. And so New North being the full service agency, we do virtually anything in marketing. And so it allowed us to build a framework, and we have a 6-step process that we follow all the way from client day one to or years down the road, and kind of have a good process going. But that framework has allowed us to fit in agencies at various stages. So while the full service, we go deep into strategy in the beginning, deep into kind of a research process and all of that. On the content side of things, we don't need to do a paid media analysis. We're writing content for them. And so we're able to start part of the way through the process, but because they're all existing under the same framework, it's a different entry point, but the exact same process. And so that kind of methodology has really helped us being able to fold a company in instead of just building a million different variations of different project management systems and tools and rules and principles and all of that.
That's great. That's great. Joe, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'm sure this is different for every industry, but in marketing, like we have certain beliefs, like as an agency, about how marketing gets done, whether that is just a content piece or whether it's a project comes in for Spoke. Spoke does a lot of project work, so it's like somebody needs an ebook written just based on a webinar recording, or it's New North, where it's like we need a full marketing infrastructure stood up. Whatever it is, like the philosophy remains the same. So it's not just like unified in project management, but we believe like customers at the center. So we do a lot of, whether it's a content plan or a strategy document or a paid media document, or even just an ebook, we always start with, okay, you'll see similar slides. If you're New North and you do that strategy doc, there's an ICP slide. Like we're going to have slides about who the target customer is. And you'll see those slides again in the content plan. You'll see them again in the paid media plan. And so there's just things that get reused and like mixed as we go through, because like they need to fit together on the service side. And so what Jacob's done is built the system where there are steps and like checks and balances at every stage to make sure that when we do make a plan document, it does extend through the rest. And if we didn't have that, you just have a content plan sitting over here in this corner, or maybe with a different customer outlined than this project over here. And no, this is, marketing. Like everything is rowing in the same direction. So that is, I think the unified philosophy is project management, but also just how we do business in general.
And makes sense. Makes sense. That's a good breakdown. So what I wanted to pivot to a little bit is talking about struggles, right? And I think every great project management work solution starts with really identifying struggles and then building a solution around that. I know you guys deal with challenges of all kinds with your clients and probably put together really dynamic steps to end up at the positive outcome at the finish line that you're looking for. So really it spans across all industries. But talking a little bit more about your guys and your organizations, how do you build project management processes that provide flexibility, right? That meet your operational needs across all the agencies? And you touched on this a little bit, Joe, but maybe you can go even a little bit more detail. Like how do you actually establish or visualize and then establish those processes? It's got to be a challenging task, but it's also a necessary task for what you guys are doing.
Yeah, I've learned a ton working here with people like Jacob, our two like partners in Justin and Tristan, because they have minds for that kind of work more than I ever have. I've been in a spot where I was like solo head of content running like my own content, but I just had everything fall on me. Like I wasn't able to build a system. Like I'm not personally, that's just not where my brain goes. So I learned something that Jacob and I have talked about, which is like principles over rules. Like I think is something we've talked about is like, there are general philosophies and principles. We were making a project management, like 10 commandments a couple weeks ago. And so basically putting these guardrails in place where it's no matter what you're doing, like this general principle applies. You need to adapt that principle for the specific project or the specific use case. But I think having that as like the foundation of everything that we've done has made it so that like when Jacob does go and builds the back end of how these things work and how they all fit together, it's like if everything is built with that in mind, that nothing is too rigid that it can't play nicely with everything around it. And so for me, I'm not going to get in there probably and like really tactically build out a system. I think if I tried, I'd probably have like cascading. I sometimes ask Jacob for things. I'm like, Jacob, can we do this? He goes, it'll break 17 things over there that you didn't think of. I'm like, thank God Jacob's here. And so it's nice that we can get together and have alignment on those two things. But I'd pass to Jacob on like the tactical. I'm more like that one thing, principles versus rules, is really important to me. But Jacob probably has more on how to.
Yeah, Jacob, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I used to take like the rules-based approach, and onboarding employees became way harder because there's all these nuances, and with this situation, they don't really follow the rule. And so that's really what led us to this principle-based approach, which gives us, as Joe mentioned, the flexibility to onboard a brand new company with its own PM process that with a couple adjustments, I can get them running in our systems, but not wildly different than the way they were doing before, just a bit cleaner, using different language and things like that. Now, the other element to that is being a lot more like outcome oriented. And so some of those principles are like, this field always needs to exist. But some of those principles are more like there should be no overdue tasks ever. And I can run a report on that. And I can see, are there any overdue tasks today? And if there are, there's a problem. And so that like data oriented, like outcome oriented approach it works when you have principles, because we have weekly and monthly reports where we're running them and saying, checking it against the principles. How well are we doing that? And that just helps us manage the disparate areas of the business in a cohesive way.
That makes sense. So kind of piggybacking on that, Jacob. So what have you seen as the biggest challenges in making sure all the different team members, whether it's paid media or developers, can collaborate effectively within the same system? Because that's got to be a challenge, right?
Yeah, that's definitely a big one. So there's a couple different elements to that. So the first one, which we always need to improve on, and it's actually a big focus of ours right now, is really around the documentation side. I think oftentimes documentation is tackled in this, we need a massive documentation project and we're going to write 1 million Word docs, or we're going to onboard some sort of LMS. And it's just a really big overhaul. And so we tackle it instead on really an ongoing and an iterative basis. And there are documents, like we have documents around how does communication work? What communication exists in the project management system? What exists in like Slack or Teams type tools? Where does that go? And there's a piece for that. But a lot of it we try handling on an ongoing basis. So we use a lot of templates and tasks. So everything, 90% of what we do here has a template. So they can grab that template, adjust it, and when we learn things about how to better roll out an AVM plan or better roll out whatever, that immediately gets folded into the document. But we don't need to go in and teaching the new employee what this step of the process looks like because they can just go watch. We add videos to tasks. We add references to other tools. So that documentation is a really big piece of it. And I'd say the second thing, at least that I'm thinking right now, is clean onboarding. So again, whether that's videos of how things were, we have Joe added this recently, which is good, like having them work through fake projects to see how they manage that. But they're the real things they'd be doing in real life too. So there's a combination of different things, but if you onboard people quickly and you have really strong documentation to do, that allows us to scale in a way that I think we weren't able to before.
Yeah, that's a great piece of business advice in general, right? The onboarding part is critical, making sure people know how to use the tools, the processes, the rules, everything that you guys have in place that's making your business successful. You want people to be able to come in and hit the ground running rather than trying to piece together puzzle pieces to figure out how they can fit in and not slow things down. So that's great. So how often do you guys find yourself adjusting or refining project management processes to stay in sync with each agency's demands?
Joe's smiling here, so it sounds like
I almost laughed. I was like, I don't know. It's every day too often. I don't
Yeah.
know. Just the way we run the business, we have these weekly leadership meetings and we have an issues list and things that we tackle. And I feel like a huge chunk of them are just process refinements. And I know Jacob's got a whole section of our project management system that's just product development. So I know for him, like a lot of prioritizing what's an immediate process update versus what is maybe a longer term process update. But if it's just a question of how often, I'm not sure there's anything in this business that is set it and forget it. I feel like we are revisiting things on a daily basis, if not,
Right.
I don't know what would be hourly. Is hourly enough? I'm not sure. Let Jacob respond to that.
Yeah, the helpful thing there is that we have a good process for getting feedback from the people running the systems. Like I wouldn't do a good job if our team wouldn't do a good job if we just made a system in the project management world and we said, all right, here, everybody, here's how you run it. And then went back to go change something else. Like that feedback is really important. So we've been able to refine that. So as Joe said, there isn't a day that goes by that something's not getting updated. And so that's just really helpful on our end too, just that communication back and forth. The real world doesn't match what theory is sometimes in the project management world.
Yeah, very true. Said. So thinking about the way you guys work internally, externally, how are you dealing with or how have you sought solutions, situations with integrations and various tools, right? You mentioned a couple of software tools already in some of the previous questions, but when you're dealing with internal communication, external communication, visibility, communication is critical, right? And what you guys are doing, I'm sure you guys need updates from your clients need updates from you. You're maintaining, I think, a pretty consistently high level of visibility. When you're talking about different tools and integrating those tools, how do you address things like automation, integration, maybe when some of the pre-built stuff isn't really meeting your needs?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things in that. So you mentioned the measuring the really visibility, I think is one thing that popped out of there. And when it comes to that, I don't know, a couple of years ago, our team was small enough where I'd be able to have a pretty good feeling of where things are at. And I would know all the clients and where they're at and where the projects are at. So I could look at our system and see even just fairly accurately and anecdotally how things are going and how clean things are. As we've grown and we bring new companies on, that becomes really impossible to have that gut feeling about everything. And so that's allowed us, and it's been a really good process of just leaning even more heavily into reporting, and decisions are made off of data. If we are talking about something around like our feelings about how something is going, that's a useful element of it, but it needs to be paired with some deeper analysis. So that reporting, I think from a visibility standpoint, is a big piece of it. And a project management tool is the hub of where all that is built around. And the other piece you mentioned is the integrations and the other tools side of that. The helpful piece in that is to just make sure that someone is accountable to that section. When it comes to like these tools, when there's so many systems already connected and existing workflows and automations, it's really easy. And Joe actually mentioned this earlier, make what seems like an innocuous change to a system that has a downstream, I think innocuous was the wrong word there, but you get where I'm going, a downstream impact on some other tool that it might have an issue with or something. And so having one person that like owns that element of it, and it's various people on the team can do that, allows for no stepping on people's toes or whatever. So that's, I think, one piece. And then we do have, Joe mentioned this too, like a process or a product development roadmap where we outline, here's the steps that we take for this implementation. That helps us just clean things up and have good communication on where everything's at.
So on the heels of that, do you have any examples that would be interesting to share of like automations or integrations that have made a noticeable impact on an outcome or end delivery for a client?
Yeah, I'm sure you have a couple too, Joe. On the top of my mind, we have a part of our business is website updates. And those are email comes in, read email, put into task, send to team. It's a very linear, repeatable process. And so we ended up integrating, we have a couple tools, we're cleaning it up now actually, but we use Zapier Forms for a while, Typeform for a while, but we have those triggers from the client side of things, can just put their information, add screenshots, whatever they want to do there. And it immediately shoots out into our project management system and then gives notifications to relevant team members around what that is, sets expectations and all that. So that's one. Probably the biggest one though, honestly, is we built really a portal or an application over top of our project management system so that we didn't need to email a client 100 times about the updates on these deliverables on a day-to-day basis or anything. We have a link to a portal that is a direct reflection of our project management system. That's helped clients to know what the status of things are, but it also helps us be accountable to keeping our internal systems clean because we can't hide it from the client. If our internal systems are a mess, the client's going to see that. And so it increases accountability, and that integration is a more custom one, but has been really helpful for us and clients as well.
Thinking again about talking about the wins, strategic decisions you guys have made and how that positively impacted the outcome. And maybe Joe, you can talk about this. Can you share like a recent time scenario where your approach to project management allowed for smoother like collaboration, faster project completion, just across agencies? Is there anything that stands out for you there?
Yeah, there's probably two sides of this. There's like for me, as I run client services, there's like the client facing side and there's the internal side. And so I know the really obvious answer is like internally, like everything runs really smoothly, but I think the example I would give is more client facing. There are things that we get asked about all the time. Like New North is a full service marketing agency. There's like things that we provide, but people get asked about anything. And it's almost in any case, like, sure, we can help with that. Let me go talk to who I need to talk to internally. And the example I have is like just running like an ABM campaign for someone that didn't use systems that we typically use. It's not that we can't or don't know how, but like the rest of our team, our developers and people, it's just not the process they would normally follow. And so I know coming back, like I can confidently say to the client, yeah, like usually we would do this, but since you guys are in this system, we'll make sure that we can get this set up. And I can come back internally and talk with Jacob and we can work together on sort of like same idea, like the principles over rules, like customizing a task template so that it applies to this new case. And in this case, the client was not an expert in their own. I think they inherited the system. They didn't know like how to manage the back end of the thing that they were saddled with. And so we were able to come out looking a lot better by being the people who would come in and help instead of saying, oh, it doesn't fit our process. Not sure. You're going to have to change your system or do X, Y, and Z. And yeah, it's really nice. Like on my end, again, not the person necessarily building a system, but having to go execute it to know that I can like lean on that in my client conversations and know that we don't overpromise, but I can very confidently go into conversations and say, yeah, like I know we're set up to take care of this. Let me go discuss with people and make sure that we can get it done. Yeah, I was pretty happy with that. It was a case where I've been at other agencies where if any little thing goes outside of the norm, it breaks everything. It was really nice to know that just wouldn't happen and it wouldn't be possible without the work that's been done on the back end for all these project management processes.
That's great. That's great. So I want to talk a little bit about what I would consider the geekier side of apps and software, but it's the stuff that I think is super cool because it not only, it takes software that's designed to make our lives easier and more efficient, and then makes it even easier and more efficient because it allows us to establish ways for different tools to communicate well with each other and automate what we're doing more and more with each go. how have integrations, and you guys have touched on this a little bit, but how have some of those integrations you guys between tools helped you minimize manual work, right? How has it helped you shorten time cycles, automate, like you touched on one a little bit earlier, Jacob, about email, you receive email, read email, send this type of alert, send this type of update. But maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. How has that helped you positively affect an outcome for clients?
hmm Yeah, nobody likes doing repetitious manual work. And so the person doing it doesn't like it, and the management team doesn't like it either because it's a waste of valuable team resources and smart people. And so in that, the way that we typically handle automations just philosophically is we do things manually first for a while until we can really map out the process in a really clear way. And then only then will we start to automate the work. And so that ticketing system I mentioned earlier was a very simple example of that. But there are also, I don't even know what else. There are, up there, here's a good example, out of office. So we used to have a HR system with a out of office platform that was just not functional. We didn't like it. It didn't work for everyone. It was overly complicated. It just didn't work. And so instead of using that, we actually pulled out of that system and just integrated that with our project management tool. And so people fill out a form, and then we had the control to say what happens next. Who gets a notification? Who needs to approve it? How does that reflect in workload management? That type of thing. And so that wasn't really an example of the manual work, but really just people were struggling with this thing that was happening over and over again. So we had the control to be able to go in. So that integrations element is really critical for us. And I typically, I don't know, I'd rather just build stuff myself in many situations. I just want the control. When we build technology, the technology should support the business process should not match the technology functionality. And so that's why I typically go a custom route, just to make sure that we're doing what's best for the client, for the employee, for the business in whatever way, not just forcing our process into some tech that might not work for us.
Yeah. So basically what you're saying is you prefer the open API route than just selecting through some custom integrations. I think both are beneficial, right?
Mhm.
And it depends on who the end user is, how experienced they are versus maybe having spent time developing custom integration. But for you guys, the open API route is the key, right?
Yeah, that's critical. Give me a really strong API, some good webhooks, then I might never. There are actually platforms that have a very bad UI, but they have such good APIs and webhooks that we don't need to log in ever. Like we set something up, we integrate it with our systems, and no one on the team even knows we use it. I will pick that over a beautiful platform that is, I don't know. This is why I don't even know if I can do this. I'm an Android guy, not an Apple guy. I want control over everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be forced into some system. I don't know, maybe I'm a control freak or something, but I definitely lean towards that like API sort of approach and just, I want my hands on it.
Counter that, if I had my own business by myself, there's not much I'm doing with an open API. So there's different use cases for everybody. I am fortunate to have a Jacob who can make those work. And I've seen the benefit of using them because I've personally had to use other platforms that were just we get, and that it's just stuck there. And if it doesn't have a certain thing that you want it to do, you're either looking for another platform or you're changing your processes. And I think what Jacob said makes a lot of sense. We want the platforms and the technology to support the business process. So we're always coming up with processes first, and then Jacob goes and translates those into the back end for us. And if I were on my own, or if anyone else like that thinks like me is on their own, you end up having to adapt your processes to the system, which is not where you want to be as a business. You're just going to have to make sacrifices you don't want to make.
It sounds, and I think that's what the key to good teams are, is you guys take somewhat different approaches, but you're driving to the same outcome. And when you're looking at new tools, when you're considering new tools you guys want to adopt at the company, what kind of evaluation process do you go through for new tools or even a new integration to decide if that's going to fit your needs?
One of the first things I would want to do is to see what kind of tech debt that would create, because platforms are always evolving and changing. So sometimes a tool that we started using 5 years ago has new features we didn't even look at just because it's been in our platform. We've used it. So that's one of the first things I'll do is I'll say, what where does this fit in the framework? What specific thing am I also trying to accomplish with it? Because I am not someone that's going to try necessarily to get every piece of value out of every tool I use. I buy a tool for a purpose and it needs to serve that specific purpose. I'm not just going to use something because it exists. So that analysis is one of the first stages. And I'd say after that, I would want to make sure that there is I have an eye on the outcome I'm trying to achieve. Is it a faster turnaround time? Is it just a better experience? How can I measure that? Because I want to make sure that when we integrate that platform or that system, that it has the impact I'm aiming for. And it's not just a knee-jerk reaction to a one-off problem that has downstream effects for the rest of the team. And then from there, it's really just a change management process. You're testing out a little piece of the system with this new tool, iterating, rolling it out to a bigger piece, and then training the team on it and coming to that full transition onto that tool. It all varies a little bit, but those are some of the things I'm thinking about, at least when we get that in that situation.
Makes sense. So do you guys involve team members at all when you guys are establishing that review process? Is it a specialized group that evaluates tools and integrations, or do you open it up to additional team members within the company?
This is something I am personally not good at. My knee-jerk reaction is to go build. I just want to go get my hands on it, fix whatever problem is brought up. But I have a good team around me that has slowed me down from doing that move. And we've really intentionally built in our product development, like processes and roadmaps, that initial stage for pulling all the stakeholders together, like you just said, and getting that input. Because I'm behind the scenes. My team is behind the scenes. A lot of the people that do the actual building are behind the scenes. And so these tools and integrations are built for us in many cases. They're built for the people who are on the front lines. And so to not get their input is really a strong indicator we're not going to get the output that we're trying to get.
We went through this. We have a really big research process for any new client that comes on. And it's just really important for us. It's essentially our first impression with a client. Look at the amount of work that we are putting in for you in a very short amount of time. And we want to be able to show you, look what we've come up with and what's forming the foundation of our relationship moving forward. And so we spend a lot of time talking about improving it. And the first iteration of that improvement was like, wow, we nailed it. We have all these different prompts and AI research, and we have different tools all integrated together in these different processes. It was all mapped out really well. And then in practice, we had people running through it, and Jacob always does a really good job of this, despite what he might have said, is let's get a test run and see how it goes and collecting that feedback. And I feel like very quickly we overhauled the whole thing a second time, because it was the outcome was good, but we were this is taking too long for everybody. So we're happy with where it landed, but we got to make it faster. Maybe that means bringing in a new tool. And so at least for me on the front end, dealing with clients, it's we talked about it earlier, all that iteration of different things, that applies to tool review as well. Bringing people in and seeing, is this actually going to work for the people on the ground every day doing the work for the clients in an agency setting? Because if it doesn't, it's not going to help the business very much. Yeah.
That makes sense. Going back to a point you made earlier about Joe, about onboarding. So when you've got different work styles right across creative, tech, operational roles, sales, business development, and you touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to just peel back the layers a little bit more here. What onboarding or adjustments to approaches have been most effective in getting everybody aligned, right? Because I think getting people aligned and involved in projects and driving towards the results you're seeking, obviously the faster the better, but you always have to toe that line of not rushing too quickly, and then you end up with somebody who has to keep going back and back, taking one step forward, 3 steps back after they've gotten on board. Have there been any effective approaches you've taken with that?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about this, Jacob, me, and the rest of the team, about how to make this more effective. I remember when I had first joined, when I was talking to newer folks, we had their first few sort of training or onboarding sessions lined up. And it ended up feeling like talking at them a lot. And it was all right, what questions do you have? And people would just be I don't know, none. And then they'd move on. And then it ended up being a long process of ad hoc meetings, just, hey, 10 minutes here to go over a specific use case. And so where we landed was getting that out of the way, async videos. Jacob made this whole library of training videos for people to watch. So here's the basics, watch these. then come to meetings and ask questions. And so now you get hands-on, go do it, like doing an internal project, basically making up like fake thing, like real things like in theory, but we've been talking about having people do a marketing project like for the agency. So it's like a real thing that needs to get done, but not necessarily client facing yet. And getting them to walk through it and like that hands-on nature and making the training as like in the moment as possible. So they open a process template that Jacob put together. And it's not, all right, I hope you remember that training session you had 3 months ago. It's great. Here is the very specific thing that you're working on now, and getting them like in the moment to know what's going through or what it takes to go through that process. And I just feel like getting things to be more like just in time training as opposed to, all right, let's hope that we covered all our bases in these 2 weeks of hour-long meetings and move on. And having the project management system set up to accommodate that has been really helpful. It makes like a very natural place to slot these things in. But it's like night and day from when I first joined and we were just doing sort of ad hoc meetings and taking a lot of time. When you're small, like, not a big deal. But as you grow, you just can't have people doing these ad hoc 15-minute meetings 15 times a day just to learn one piece of the process.
Jacob, anything to add to that from your review?
One element that I've been thinking a lot about, which we're starting to do and we'll dive into even more, I think so, is to give people a better perspective and input into what the other people are doing on the other side of those tasks. Because it's very easy to go assign something and then either be very critical if it comes back incorrectly or to not even spec something well in the first place. And so one thing we've been playing with a little bit is to actually give, as an example, like a 30-minute video editing task to someone that's never going to do video editing, but they're assigning a bunch of work. So they know what a layer is, they know how the system works, and they can get a better idea of how to really spec and estimate and communicate with the people doing that work. And that increased empathy, I think, is a really outsized impact. That's a great use of 30 minutes in my mind, even though it can come across as you're not going to use that for anything. But I think that's another big element that we're pushing into a little bit more.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a really good approach. We have a similar onboarding approach at Meagle, which is regardless of what role you're in within the company, everybody spends time receiving, reading customer tickets, inbound inquiries, new inquiries, support inquiries, responding to those customers, because it really gives you a chance to just roll up your sleeves and understand what people need and what challenges they're facing, how Meagle can solve those problems for them, and really just having those conversations. I think that's a great way to do it. It gives everyone a view on the front lines of what the impact is of the tools you're building. So certainly. One last touch on the integration side, because again, I think it's really unique that we've got you both here joining us, and you both are successfully leading aspects of this business, but you in some ways approach it in different ways. So how do you guys, when you get to that point in a customer project and you're considering a structured integration or flexible API, how does that play out in the whole project management approach? Are you looking at it as, well, let's just ask the customer, the client, what do they prefer? Or do we have a set strategy that we know will work for them? Just trust us, we'll handle it. How do you guys take that approach on considering a flexible API or something structured for them?
Joe's really good at this piece, but the big thing you need to do here is just dive into what they're actually looking for. A lot of the times, a client or really anyone looking to kind of kickstart something, sometimes they're not even sure what they want from something. And so they'll say things like, I want to integrate these two platforms. Or what do you mean by that? What are you looking to accomplish for that? What is that replacing? Do you currently use those tools right now? Those types of questions allow us to get so much deeper into what output they're trying to get. And we'll often discover in some cases that they don't really need that integration. Actually, they're just using one of their tools incorrectly. And so that just like Q&A session, if you will, just to dive way deeper into what they really mean behind it, is where a lot of the value comes in. And not doing that up front can actually cause massive problems down the road, because you set your compass a little bit off and you end up in a destination that's nowhere where we were trying to result in. I say all of that really because whether custom, whether basic, there are so many variables in there, and I don't really care. Whatever the client wants to do, we'll do but we want to we want to aim at the outcome they're trying to get to, not on the things that they put forward, because those sometimes don't match.
Yeah, I think that's when something that's important is like our team, we're full service agency, not every, Justin, one of our partners says this in sales meetings a lot. If you can find somebody that's an expert in writing, video editing, graphic design, web analytics, by the way, they can do if you can find someone who can do literally everything, let us know. We'll hire them on the spot. It's just not the case. So like our team needs to go into client meetings. And I think at times it's almost like helpful to not have an answer to everything, like to not know the answer to that integration problem, because if you're someone who's such an expert in it, you might just start applying answers to questions. And so Jacob's point about asking questions and being able to dig in and really understand the business problem, that's what we're more focused on training. Because then I, like someone who's not that expert, I can say, great, thank you for all that information. Let me bring it back to the developers. Let me bring it back to Jacob and talk this out and figure it out. And maybe I bring them on to the next call and we figure out what the best way to do it is. But just having answers to everything off the bat, if I just making blanket statements and decisions, we have our way of doing things, but that doesn't mean that it fits for every situation. And we don't pretend that it does. And so whether you need a custom integration or something that's just built in, we'll make whatever work based on what the client needs are, really.
That's great. That's great feedback. So what I'd love to roll into here now is lessons learned, right? And you guys have shared an abundance of great information here. And I truly appreciate it. You guys walking us through how the business has been able to grow and succeed and how you tackle key decisions both internally and externally. Would love to hear, what are the top lessons you've learned from coordinating multiple teams and agencies within one project, like one framework? What are the lessons you've learned in trying to make that happen, that coordination?
When I was younger, I played soccer, and my coach always said this acronym KISS. And he'd be like, KISS. And he'd just say, keep it simple, stupid. And what he meant by that is essentially like the fanciest tricks and footwork and all this stuff. That's not what's going to win games. What wins games is like really solid fundamentals. And so that's where we get to things like those project management principles. That's where we get to things like really clear expectations on communication. I think sometimes as you grow and naturally a business will become more complicated as it grows. In my opinion, that complication needs to exist in like things like reporting, but that can happen behind the scenes. Like the team in the front lines need things to be as simple as humanly possible. And so if you keep things simple, I think you just stop so many problems downstream from happening. So that's a big focus for us, at least as we do this.
I feel like I have to answer with a saying. So Jacob, keep simple, stupid. I'll go with measure twice, cut once, I think is I come from startup background. Like I haven't often had the kind of abilities on the back end that like Jacob provides. So like when I was running content at a startup, it was just like, you wear all the hats, like you go do whatever you can. And I always said, I am not somebody who scales. Like I can sit down and do the work, and then coming into roles like this one, that's great if I can come up with this outline of an ABM plan. But what about like the 7 people that are doing it for the 60 other clients? If they can't do it, it doesn't really matter if I can. And being able to slow down and make sure that like the systems are in place so that everybody can do these things is something that I had to learn. It's something I've learned a lot, being able to integrate with the systems that we have, is that there is way more value in getting it right and getting it to be scalable early, as opposed to just plowing ahead and then having to go back and rebuild every process or figure everything out because you were like, I just got to get this one project done. It's cool. There's 15 others waiting in the wings. You ready to do those as well? And it's like, nope, didn't come up with the process. I've learned a lot about that. It's been nice working here and getting to work with the people that I do, like Jacob. So learned quite a bit.
That's great. That's great. A couple more questions here on the lessons learned. So guys, like looking back, what would you advise to others who are scaling projects and project management across diverse teams and potentially are integrating new tools? Like how would you advise those folks on what approaches to take, what pitfalls to avoid, what paths to brighter futures to follow in that effort?
Yeah, my two things pop out. Number one falls on the softer side in communication. As you have more varied set of stakeholders and people who are involved from different backgrounds and different companies, even, you need to communicate things sometimes 10 times before it gets through. And it's not a matter of inadequate team members or anything. It's just they're getting used to a new system. There's a lot going on. We move fast. And so that's really on the more human management side of it, is around communication. But the other piece on the more technical side is to build for tomorrow. These platforms that we're talking about are not something you're going to use for a month and move on. These are multi-year platforms. And so when you're building, don't think about your spec should not be, what do I need today? Your spec is going to be, if I grow 10x, can this platform handle that type of growth? And if it can't, you need to consider a different platform that does have the workflows, the automations, the scalability that makes sense. And spending that time to do it on the front end will reap a lot of benefits down the road, because it is hard to replace some of these core systems once they're in place.
And I would add documentation, not just on the systems themselves, but on the team side, like giving an avenue to provide feedback about how the processes are working, and being able to say, in this example here, this should have worked this way and it didn't. I feel like I've definitely fallen into this mistake before, where I run to Jacob and I'm like, man, this should work this way. And he's like, great. Can I see an example? I'm like, man, that was like 2 weeks ago and I don't remember where it was. And so there's not a lot you can fix if you don't have something in front of you. And so for the team, being able to see or have either it's a form or just some sort of like area to put all of their inputs into, and making them like ensure that there are examples and saying, hey, this is what happened. This is what I think should have happened. Here's an idea of how to build moving forward. It just gives like someone like a Jacob or anyone on Jacob's team who is like going back and refining those processes tactically, like way more to go off of than if it was just, hey, Jacob, I had this really cool idea. What if we did that? And he's okay, I'll try, Joe. Thanks. Appreciate it.
That's great. That's great. You guys have shared an abundance of really insightful information here. I know a few things that stand out to me. Joe, you mentioned document, especially when trying to build or create a smooth onboarding process. I think that's critical. You also mentioned something that stood out to me, which was it's okay to walk into a meeting with clients without having all the answers already, right? And just show up and listen and figure out what people need, and then develop those solutions along the way. Jacob, you mentioned that decisions are made with data. That's great. Like I could literally wear that on, we could all wear that on a t-shirt, right? Or have it tattooed on our arms or on a neon sign behind us in future episodes, right? Decisions are made with data. That is a great quote and couldn't be more true. I really appreciate you guys joining us here on this kickoff episode of Process Unpacked. I'm really excited about how we're going to talk to innovators and leaders and just people who are developing and building amazing businesses and solutions in both in the project management space and in various verticals that are leveraging innovation in the project management space, and just the really cool things you guys are doing. You guys are obviously great partners. We're super excited to be working closely with you and appreciate all you guys are doing with us and for us.
Thanks for tuning in to Process Unpacked. Follow us wherever you listen to podcasts, or start a free trial of Meagle at www.meagle.com.